You have probably already heard by now that President Trump has signed the stimulus bill and there will be a vote. Perhaps the vote has already occurred by the time you're watching this video on the increase from the $600 to the $2,000 per person for the COVID relief checks. But one item that is not being discussed too often right now, which is a caveat in Trump's announcement about his decision to sign this bill, which originally he said he was not going to sign, is about Section 230, which I have talked a lot about on this channel. It's essentially the part of the Communication Decency Act of 1996, which has allowed big tech companies to remain free from basically getting sued by what somebody like myself says on their platform. So they're not held liable for what I say, which has allowed people like me to say things like I'm about to say on YouTube. Now, of course, there's been a lot of chatter and drama, political theater around Section 230, revoking it, disassembling it essentially, and doing so because you'll hear people complaining that there's a lot of censorship online, which is true. I have been the subject of censorship by these companies. That said, I've also tried to be very thoughtful about what the solution is because I don't believe, at least I have not heard a good argument for, why revoking Section 230 is going to get us more freedom. In fact, I believe it will bring us less freedom. If you want to argue differently in the comment section and give me a reason why you believe that, please do let me know. It also helps if you like, share, make sure you're subscribed, and there are links in the description for how you can support my work. First, let's read what Trump said, then we're going to discuss it. So this is the statement from the president issued December 27th, 2020. I'm not going to read you it all. I'm actually going to just basically scroll down to the bottom here, and there he talks about the check, okay? Then he says that the House and Senate agreed to focus strongly on the very substantial voter fraud, which took place in the November 3rd presidential election, and the Senate will start the process for a vote that increases checks to 2,000, repeals Section 230, and starts an investigation into voter fraud. Big tech must not get protections from Section 230. Voter fraud must be fixed. Much more money is coming. I will never give up my fight for the American people. Actually, if you scroll up just a little bit here, right after the checks, he says, additionally, Congress has promised that Section 230, which so unfairly benefits big tech at the expense of the American people, will be reviewed and either be terminated or substantially reformed. And then again, as I already read to you, he then says that the Senate will start the process for a vote that repeals Section 230. What's really going on here? I am not totally sure. I have talked about people like Lindsey Graham proposing legislation that would basically give Congress 2 years to do something about Section 230. Otherwise, Section 230 just becomes defunct and goes away. I have talked about how both Biden and Trump want to revoke Section 230. They both talked about it. Now, the left often talks about it because they feel like there's too much disinformation out there. And the right talks about it because they feel like they're censored too often. So they have different reasons for wanting to get rid of Section 230. I frankly, from the research I've done, think both of them and both arguments for getting rid of it are disinformed. Is that a right word? Misinformed? Disinformed? I don't know. I'm just saying, tomato, tomato. The reason I can say something wrong, like I just said if I did, is because YouTube's not going to get sued for my grammar and my grammatical mistakes, okay? But I do believe that if these tech companies could be sued for what I say, that they're going to lock down more on speech. I've said before that Jack Dorsey has mentioned this in the past. I've used this metaphor, which maybe you'll push back on me about, but like if they own the tennis courts and we're all mad that they don't let us play tennis the way we want to play, okay? And we're like, you got to follow our rules. You got to let us play this. You got to let us play that. Well, they just could say, you know what? We're closing the tennis courts, all right? Because they own them. So that's what we have to understand first and foremost. And it's just it concerns me that, and I'm going to show you actually. I'm not surprised, but it does concern me that there are a lot of arguments for this that don't necessarily take into account the long-term effects. Now, part of that is because mainstream media is not really covering this issue in depth. Why? Well, part of me believes it's because I don't think they think they're going to be that wholly affected by it. Take a look at this clip real fast. This was on the Today Show, a wrap of the stimulus bill and Trump signing it.
The other promises the president says he secured from Congress probably won't amount to much. Their session ends on Saturday.
So that's the reporter tag at the end of the story that ran on TV, which he mostly focused on the checks themselves, but didn't mention 230 at all. He just says at the end, basically, the other promises that Trump says he secured from Congress don't really matter because Congress's session ends in a few days. Done. And so it doesn't surprise me that if they're not talking about it, that most people don't have a very, in-depth understanding of what's really going on here, because the journalists themselves are not doing it. Now, hey, maybe it's because the guy only gets 2 minutes to tell what's going on. As a TV news reporter in a past life, I've talked about this, right? You only get a few minutes to say your piece and you can't say everything. So maybe the guy in good faith just had to focus on the money part of it because he couldn't get into the other stuff. I don't know. Obviously, I have to choose things. I didn't read you the entire letter of Trump's. I'm focusing on Section 230. That said, I do find that people often argue this topic without, like I said, without the long-term consequences really being considered. And it's more from this sort of reactive, it's a David Goliath thing, like slam the giant. Whether you're going to actually get what you think you're going to get, I think is a really important question. And that's why, as I've said before, as somebody who has faced the consequences of these very, in my opinion, subjective and arbitrary censorship policies, which do exist, I don't want to make things worse by hammering down on them thinking that, hey, now I really got one over on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, when in fact, that may not end up being the case. It may end up being worse. We've already seen how they've been very open that they're promoting more of the corporate news stations because they're calling them authoritative sources over people like myself. Why? Because those sources are the ones in part pressuring them to censor more. So that's the other weird thing about all this, is journalists calling for this kind of stuff. So maybe that's another reason why they're not covering Section 230 that much, because maybe they like the censorship. I found that to be a totally bizarre phenomenon among journalists, which I've also talked about. Anyway, I'm going to leave it here. Not totally sure what will have happened by the time you watch this video, but whatever happens, I do hope you subscribe to the channel. Again, links in the description for how you can support my work, but please do leave me a comment, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.